When it comes to our piecing accuracy, a big part of it is the way we press. And I would love to give you some pointers and things that really come into play as far as pressing our seams. So first off, it's a matter of what iron you use and whether you like to use steam or not. I prefer using steam, and so make sure that you have an iron then if you like steam. Preferably, I like to have an iron that I can control the steam, so you can control it between a low steam and a high steam, and then also maybe no steam if that is the case. Now, if you prefer a dry iron, you can definitely use all of these techniques as well. So let's start with just pressing seams open or to one side. In my patterns, I prefer to press to one side throughout most of my patterns, and I do that because I like to be efficient, saving time and nesting my seams. So that eliminates the time I need spending matching things and pinning, and it really does help with my piecing accuracy as far as matching seams. So the other reasoning too, and this is probably something you've heard before, if you have a quilt, if a thread pops open and a piece of the thread breaks, you will have a little hole in it. So if you at least have your seams pressed to one side, even if a seam pops open, you will always have fabric underneath. It won't just be a gap right into the batting. Usually that's a rare occasion, of course, but that is another reason why I like to press to one side. So as we press, so number one rule is always press from the right side of the fabric. So as we're pressing, we want to press from the right side of the fabric here, not from the back. If you take the iron and press from the back side, what can happen here every time you press is you might be leaving a little bit of a crease inside that seam, and that way a little bit of 1/8 of an inch you can lose extra in the seam, and so as those seams add up, your block is not going to end up being the size it's supposed to be. So number one rule is always pressing from the right side of the fabric. So as I press, I always like to, as you sew your seam, take your iron and set your seam. So what this does, it compresses that thread, also prepares the fabrics nice and warm to fold over that seam, and the threads are nice and compressed, so that seam is going to lay flat. After you set the seam, I fold my fabric out, and then you want to make sure you just push with your fingertips, push that seam out, and then just follow along with your iron straight across. You want to avoid using the curved side of the iron to push your seam out, especially if you use steam. When actually with a regular hot iron as well. Because of that curved edge, if you do that, that seam could take a little bit of a bend every time you're pushing that out. We also need to remember we want to press and not iron. We're not ironing creases out of a shirt. So again, push the seam out as you go and follow straight across with your iron. Like I explained before, in most cases in my patterns, I like to press to one side so everything nests nicely and lays really flat. There are occasions that I do use pressing open method. That is when we have a lot of seams coming together and the block is really going to lay flat. Another technique that I do use in my patterns and I've done videos on is spinning my seams. Wherever I have 4 seams coming together, then you can flatten out that center and it's going to be nice and flat and the block will lay nice and flat. But whether you like to press every seam open or to one side, some of these techniques that I've mentioned are still going to be completely valid. So let's talk about strip sets. In many times in quilting, you are supposed to sew together strip sets, different sizes, different widths. And sometimes even multiple strips, and then subcut them for whatever pattern. I have a little tip on pressing strip sets because I'm sure you've seen strip sets that get a little bit wavy as they go along, and many people have talked about that being your stitching. Most of the times it's your pressing. So with strip sets, I follow the same procedure as before. I like to just sew 2 strips together. I set my seam straight across, and then I open up my strip set and I push that seam out. And again, push all along and then follow with my iron. I like to push it, and then as I am ironing, that strip set is laying straight on my ironing board. I like to have a big enough area so that I can lay my whole strip out. And so once I have that pressed, you know you have a really nice and straight strip. So if you have multiples to sew together, I try to avoid sewing a single strip to a small piece. If you are sewing 6 strips together, I would sew 2 and 2 and 2, and then I would join the bigger pieces. If you have 8, I would join the 2, so you have 4, and then you have 4, and then finally join the 4s. Always pressing in between every step. That way ensures that you have really nice and straight strip sets that will highly improve your accuracy when you're doing anything with strip piecing like that. Now let's look at a technique where, for example, a folded corner. You have a square that you've drawn a diagonal line on. You place that on your corner and you sew corner to corner. Now sometimes when we're pressing these, we end up having a pretty wonky corner triangle, or we're a little short. So my advice on this, whenever I draw a line, so instead of sewing straight on the line, in your instructions you're instructed to sew on that drawn line. Instead, pretend that you are drawing a second line with your needle, and you're going to draw it just on the outside of that first one. So this is the part that we are going to be trimming off when we do this technique. So you want to sew it on the outside, on that same side that gets trimmed off, just hugging that line with your needle. So as you have sewn it, you will see here with the light thread that it's a little bit on the outside. So same thing applies here. I either trim this piece off before, or you can also do it afterwards. Press it, fold it out, make sure you fold it with your fingers first, and then go straight across. And then you can trim this afterwards. But you will see, if you do that, sewing a little bit on the outside, you will get a much straighter piece and much more likely to be even with the sides after pressing. Now let me just mention some of the tools that can be very helpful with your pressing. Now in part 1 of the piecing accuracy videos, I talked about pre-treating your fabrics before you do anything, and best press starch, of course, is really going to help laying those seams flat in the pressing process, but that I talked about earlier, so you can look back into that. Of course, your number 1 tool is going to be your iron. I prefer the reliable irons. I like it because the sole plate can be set to a different heat than my steam, and I can have steam, whether I have low heat on my sole plate or high heat. I can have low steam, high steam, or take it all the way off. So I really love these. We have both the velocity that is like this with water that you put in here, or we have the one with a big tank where you don't have water in the actual handle. So another tool that I love using are the wool pressing mats. So what the wool pressing mat does, it retains the heat from the iron. So as you are pressing your blocks on these, it will keep that heat and pretty much press the block from the bottom as you're pressing the top. So it really flattens those seams even better than just using a regular ironing board or mat. If I am doing any kind of open seams, I love the pressing bar. So this has a little wool coating here that if I have to open up a seam, I place that seam right on top. It pulls the fabrics down, and it's much easier to open that seam up, and then I can run my iron across it as I open up that seam. I can have it move across this way. So as I pull it off, it's going to be really nice and flat pressed open. The beautiful thing about this pressing bar, it kind of seconds as a clapper. So you can press your seam, you can place that on, and the heat will continue to press that seam flat.